Obviously not an election. This, by definition, is not a free and fair process.
What would USAID be able to do if we doubled USAID budget?
There's a lot in your question, and grateful, for, of course, for the premise of the question.
As members of Congress who can't sit by, cannot sit by and watch what's happening, to do what needs to get done at this moment.
The thought of children starving any place is very disturbing to me. Can you quantify that?
I finally went as a member of Congress to Israel, asking that your agency, which is doing great work on the ground in Ukraine and surrounding countries, prioritize the needs of women and girls.
Is USAID using these outdated and, frankly, if it wasn't so sad, laughable climate models to justify a carbon-free shift in Power Africa?
Stipulate we are not using laughable models.
Mr. Schroeder, I assume you're up to date on what is transpiring in Venezuela, including the disqualification of both Maria Corina Machado and then the standing candidate who Machado designated in her place. And so knowing of the fact that the opposition has been disqualified from running, what redeemable value is left in this exercise? It's obviously not an election that's about to take place in July. Shouldn't we be able to say at this moment that, based on the facts, what has transpired, that this by definition is not a free and fair process?
Well, certainly we share your concern that the coming elections are already falling far short of anything resembling international standards. I guess and you are very, very familiar with the situation on the ground there and the exclusion, intimidation, arrest of opposition leaders. I think the element that we are grappling with together is that the Venezuelan people, of course, want elections, have long wanted elections, and leaders from across the political spectrum have decided to participate, and they are preparing for and participating, viewing it as the best way to show just, again, how much discontent there is with the conditions and with the leadership by Maduro.
But again, the main opposition candidates have now been rejected from participating. Why are we going to be spending taxpayer funds on observing what is in essence a farce? So again, I need some reassurances, because spending taxpayer money on just kind of like a farce is the kind of thing that I think the American people have issues with.
I mean, maybe we could just take offline this discussion. I have seen other parts of the world, when the United States declares an election, when the United States government declares an election unfree or unfair, it gets one reaction. When we're able to bring in independent, non-governmental monitors who make that assessment, it actually has more credibility, including in the kinds of circles, again, that we are seeking to enlist in putting more pressure on Maduro, since clearly, again, we are not seeing the pressure that we are imposing producing the desired results.
What new public arguments are you making to build, I guess, broader public and political support? And finally, again, going to the defense budget, we increased the Pentagon spending by $27 billion last year. That's almost as big as USAID's fiscal 25 budget request, I believe roughly around $28 billion. And so what would USAID be able to do if we doubled USAID budget, making only a minor dent, mind you, minor dent? I know there's about 150 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse in the resources provided to the Defense Department, and how would this impact both U.S. security and the security of our country, allies, and partners?
Well, there's a lot in your question, and grateful, for, of course, for the premise of the question. I think it was the day before yesterday, I testified by our Senate counterpart, Appropriations Subcommittee, and Senator Graham began the hearing by saying, I'm as hawkish as the next guy, but we can't kill our way out of this mess, meaning the number of crises that exist around the world, so many of them at their root lie either severe economic deprivation evil radicalization, but that still requires reaching young people and, diverting them from the path of radicalization. We just experienced a once-in-a-century pandemic where more lab capacity, more surveillance certainly is one of the lessons we take from that something that can harm American lives can come from anywhere. And we have a great global health security initiative that you all have supported. But in the bill that just passed, we had to cut it by $200 million. And that's, I know COVID is receding, but not for those families who lost loved ones. And we just, can't know precisely where the next threat to American health is going to come from, but we can diversify our portfolio and really make investments with other countries, leveraging those investments to get other countries to do more as well.
And whether or not you have difficulty with the organization of UNRWA, which there very well may be in terms of you got people at the IDF who've now been removed, and there will be an investigation. There is a current investigation of what happened, et cetera, and that should be ongoing. We'll figure it out. But each and every one of those organizations said very clearly to me that we may be going to another form of doing this, but in the interim, in the short term, it is the only distribution system that we have to get out quantities of humanitarian assistance in the volume that it's needed to go right now to stave off hunger, starvation, and the other efforts that are engaged and involved with providing humanitarian assistance. So I just think that the complexity of this, of distributing this aid, is got to be truly understood in our country of what needs to happen. It's not slam dunk. You go away and we're going to take it over. That is not the case. And we have to understand what happens. And you're in a position to help to understand that or tell us what that complexity is so that we can do something about it as members of Congress who can't sit by, cannot sit by and watch what's happening.
Let me thank
what is the capabilities of these groups to do what needs to get done at this moment?
I'll just be brief. I know I'm mindful of time, but what I would say is that UNRWA before October 7th, and again, I think we all these allegations are very serious against these named individuals, and the investigation that the UN is doing, the outside investigation, are extremely important, and there are broader lessons for all of our partners to learn. But what is hard to explain, there's the complexity of the war environment, but there's the complexity that UNRWA is just unlike anything that we. And I want to stress, USAID doesn't fund UNRWA. It comes out of the State Department. There are people in our government that are much more expert than I am. But it is a quasi-administration for schools. And we've had exchanges over the years about, again, the problematic textbooks and so forth. But the teachers for Palestinians in Gaza before October 7th were UNRWA teachers. The health workers were paid by UNRWA. So there was a pre-existing pool of 13,000 people, of which a significant subset, since there's very few health facilities still functional, and all the schools have either closed or are no longer operational or have been destroyed. Those people pivoted to being involved in this distribution, and so I think that's the exchange. Also, Mr. Chairman, in terms of what you mentioned at the beginning, for now. World Food Program, UNICEF, they have dozens of employees on the ground, not thousands. And the government of Israel even, a month ago sought, again, understandably in light of these allegations, but came to the view that they don't want UNRWA involved in convoys. But it became impossible to do convoys to address the level of food insecurity. So now, thankfully, they have reversed that position and are now allowing UNRWA trucks and vehicles to be at least part of convoys, even though they're maintaining the position on whether UNRWA leads convoys. But this is just an example of the necessity, given the degree of urgency around food needs, to draw on the infrastructure that exists. we just don't have the luxury of having some wholesale building of an entirely new distribution system while bombs are falling and while severe acute malnutrition is skyrocketing.
Last year, as you may recall, I asked you how USAID planned on increasing sustainability for a $17 billion contract to distribute medicines around the world, which was a renewal of a $10 billion contract before that, which was a renewal of a series of awards going back to the 1960s. We discussed and you agreed that USAID planned on changing business as usual by working with more local partners in a more market-based and sustainable model rather than perpetuating the often disappointing legacy approaches. However, I've been disappointed to read that USAID has once again starting to issue these contracts to the same set of legacy Washington, D.C. based aid contractors. My first question is, what is your strategy, and can you assure this committee that USAID actually plans on doing things differently with respect to these awards and changing the development model to include more market-based, sustainable local partners? Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for sticking with this and with us. We have set targets to channel our assistance to local partners to try to get to 25% by 2025. We are going to fall short of that target. There are many barriers that I'd welcome the chance to follow up on offline. In terms of contracting officers, we have far fewer contracting officers than, for example, DOD, which I may have said in the exchange last year. Forgive me, I don't remember. I think we have gotten to the place where we're now at about slightly higher than 10% of our assistance more broadly. Where we are lagging, as your question underscores, is in bulk procurement. I think we have a long way to go there.
Again, I'm a grandmother, so the thought of children starving any place is very disturbing to me. And I think you said this, there is famine all over the world. Can you quantify that? And like with examples of countries? I think.
Well,
yeah.
Again,
Yes.
I'm very deferential here to the experts. There's a a committee of experts that looks at this, and there's a set of maybe if you're interested, sort of the technical requirements around the percentage of children who are malnourished, the number of families, percentage of families facing severe food insecurity. I think the places that we are most alert to the risk of food insecurity and food scarcity causing large-scale loss of life and suffering would be Sudan right now and Gaza. But there are pockets, in Burkina Faso where warnings have been issued. There have been pockets of Ethiopia in light of the drought conditions and very significant conflict that has impeded humanitarian access.
Cargo's preference law requires federal agencies to ship at least half of the taxpayers' financed cargo on U.S.-flagged, U.S.-owned, U.S.-crewed ships. In the recent years, USDA has only shipped about 30% of its cargo on U.S.-flagged ships, while those vessels remain laid up and their mariners out of work. Please outline for me what USA can do to maximize its use of these U.S.-flagged vessels over the coming year, consistent with its obligation under law.
So as you know, we're required to ship 50% of our commodities on U.S.-flagged ships. I think there are two issues. One, and I think your question got at this, but there aren't enough U.S.-flagged ships in the program, and some of those ships are very old. And two, partly because of the other countries involved in this business that you mentioned, it is more expensive to ship on U.S. ships than on foreign flag ships. Today, because the number of bulk vessels that are U.S. flagged is limited, today there are only 4 bulk vessels operating under U.S. flag, and and maybe this is kind of what you were getting at, but last year USAID did not receive U.S. flag offers on 33% of our bulk cargo opportunities in FY 2023.
And I just want to say to you that I welcome a separate hearing with witnesses who are a bit more directly involved in the situation, such as the U.S. ambassador to the UN, so that we can continue to have a more informed conversation around what is happening in Israel and in Gaza. I know I was supposed to travel with you last year to the area, and I finally went as a member of Congress to Israel, and unfortunately, one of the sites that we were supposed to see at the northern Lebanon border, we were not able to reach because it got bombed just hours before we arrived. So the situation there is still very tense. And, you know, we do need to have a conversation around that.
While funding decisions are intended to be made by ambassadors at each post, the programming decisions tend to be made here in Washington. What are you doing at USAID to ensure that these efforts are coordinated across agencies and aligned with our national security and diplomatic objectives, like countering the Chinese Communist Party, for example?
Yeah, well, I think, actually, it's a great example. I think the Global Infrastructure Initiative is an example of where the NSC role in coordinating and bringing all those agencies together is extremely important around global infrastructure. USAID's share of that is catalytic. It's often regulatory, or it's, you know, taking our food security programs and making sure that the beneficiaries, for example, can benefit from the Libido Railroad as it gets built. We might do a public-private partnership with the Angolan Ministry of Transportation so that they can get other transportation concessions going. So that's our slice of it, but the DFC might be making the much more substantial investments. So I think the NSC has a critical role to play. I would say Feed the Future, our food security programs, another area where USDA, MCC, DFC all have, State Department, of course, have active programming. There, you know, I'm the chair of the Feed the Future board, and we bring the other agencies together around our shared agricultural food security agenda, including research investments that we and USDA and others are making domestically to make sure we're benefiting from the best minds of the United States.
Last year, Representatives Franco, Houlihan, and I sent a bipartisan letter asking that your agency, which is doing great work on the ground in Ukraine and surrounding countries, prioritize the needs of women and girls in humanitarian funding and assistance strategies to address gender-based violence. Can you also speak to how USAID and partners are addressing gender-based violence in Ukraine and host countries?
Well, thank you. I'm glad this is a topic that is getting more attention than it often does today. Maybe I would just note, beyond what I've said already in response to Congresswoman Frankel's comments, that in Ukraine, again, thanks to the resources that we were able to invest in two broad domains, humanitarian emergency response and development assistance, we've been able to do an awful lot. You know, everything from hotlines to prevent sexual trafficking, which was a major issue as those refugees poured into Eastern Europe when the war began and have continued to flow with Putin's escalation in recent weeks. Gender-based violence care, psychosocial support, also support for you know, alerts so that people know their rights, and we try to chip away at the stigma around sexual violence, because in the first wave of the invasion during the occupation of Ukrainian territories from which Russian forces were ultimately repelled in many places, so many women came out of that, not only having suffered unimaginable rape and sexual imprisonment and torture, but also feeling in their communities that they couldn't talk about it. And I will say, President Zelensky and Madam Zelensky have done a really good job trying to destigmatize and really make clear, who's at fault in horrors of that nature.
On the assumption of how many migrants the administration expects to migrate, what kind of numbers are anticipated this year?
With respect, that kind of question I think is better oriented toward CBP or toward DHS.
Well, you're requesting the increase in funding here, which I'm
in order
assuming
to
is
prevent the migration. We're trying to prevent it and address root causes in the communities in question. I'm happy to elaborate, but go ahead.
Sure, yes, please. That's my follow-up on that. So how, because what I'm trying to reason here or come to a conclusion is, if there's an increase in this, that means that we're maybe expecting a higher number, or you're preparing for a higher number. And if that's the case, what are you preparing for? Or the increased funding, you're trying to maybe stop it or redirect it. So what's the expectation here in terms of the encounters that we're going to probably see from what you're seeing, and where this funding would go to alleviate or tackle that issue?
So, okay, I'll try, but again, we're working, the place where we have done what we're asking for resources to do more of is Northern Central America, more than any other place in the hemisphere, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And the work, and we'd be happy, especially if you want to dig into this, to drill into this because there's a little time, but these are everything from, doing citizen security, INL at the State Department, working with police, because gangs and the terror they're inflicting on people cause people as one source of migration, economic despair, of course, another one. So drawing private sector investment, the kind of anti-corruption work I was talking about sooner to create more jobs, that's very important. But I'd flag two other aspects of what USAID is doing that might be of interest. There's a huge amount of migration also within South America. And if migrants can be regularized, if, for example, their degrees, Venezuelan migrants in Peru, if their degrees are accredited in Peru, and if they are regularized and able to work and send their kids to school in Peru, they're much less likely to come north. So we work a lot with the Colombian government, the Peruvian government, the Brazilian government, in a support role to help them provide services to migrants.
Power Africa program, seeking to meet the administration's climate change commitments at the expense of Africa's need for large-scale industrial power generation, which, by the way, then keeps poor Africans, literally in the dark, which is hard to understand. So is USAID using these outdated and, frankly, if it wasn't so sad, laughable climate models to justify a carbon-free shift in Power Africa?
Stipulate we are not using laughable models, but I think that the all-of-the-above approach that we take does emphasize, there's been a lot of stress today on value for money and cost effectiveness. We are very interested in helping communities and countries electrify with least cost energy sector planning. And that doesn't rule out, for example, something you and I have had an exchange on in the past, the use of natural gas, if that's needed to stabilize energy sources. But we are compliant with the Electrify Africa Act. We are taking our cues from the market and where we can get best by climate adaptation, whatever the disagreements about climate change, which I hope we can get past. Nobody disagrees that most of the countries in which we work are, agriculturally especially, getting ravaged by the effects of hotter weather. And so the skill set for our teams, making them feel like they have the confidence to go out there and again, build the multi-sectoral partnerships that are needed to solve these problems. I think the world is affecting the state of morale, probably for many of you, and certainly at USAID, people come because they want to change the world. They want to make the world better.
Administrator, I am gonna.
He's going to cut me off.
Yeah.
But you can't do more with less. And I thank you. I beg your
No.
indulgence.
I hate cutting off
we can
the
do
full
more with
committee
more.
ranking member.
You
I hate
can
doing
do
that.
more with more.
We can definitely do a lot more with more.
But every family in the United States and every business has to also understand that we have a fiscal responsibility. We have a debt that's unsustainable. We have to do better, and we should be doing better with we need to do more We can't ask the American people to do more with less, and then the federal government continue to do less with more.
Any speculation or have you seen this happen, that Hamas is actually the one organizing, distributing, or managing where this aid goes? Because that's a high concern that I have, that I heard over and over again as I was in Israel, of that notion of Hamas controlling some of this and them actually starving their own people on this. That's a high concern for me, of where this aid and how it's not making it there. And if I look at Hamas's history of how they treat their own people, that would have been in line with everything else that they've done to the Palestinians. So what, in terms of the aid going to civilians and women and children, that's the intended purpose of that, has Hamas been intercepting or involved in any kind of that activity?
So I'd say three things. First, Hamas doesn't care about its people. Hamas has used its people as human shields.
Yeah.
We have every reason to be vigilant about Hamas and how it would act in these circumstances. I do think Hamas fighters are very much on the run and not in the position that they might be to organize some systematic scheme in light of the war. But the second thing I'd say is just we have a good sense, as does Israel, about what is going in and how much is going in, and we have a good sense of how much is needed. And there is a huge gap between what is needed and what is actually crossing the border from Israel into the Gaza Strip.
And so the Subcommittee on Foreign Operations and related programs stands adjourned.